thankful for her wavy stories. Hold on to the lifetime we won't get back. I know these rivers carry on. People tend to stick to you after time. Places tend to do the same as we do. This river carries on and on.
Hello and welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake Lamore, and this is our last episode of 2022. I just can't believe it. I almost want to cry a little bit just because it's been such a great year, and I am joined by my lovely fiancé for this episode, because if you listen to last year's top 10 episodes of 2021, I featured Lizzie Jolich with me on the podcast, who was my girlfriend at the time, and she is now my fiance. We just became engaged a couple weeks ago, and I want to thank you for saying yes.
Oh, thank you for asking.
And D. Westphal Jewelers, thank you to them as well. But no, I love you very much, my Lizzie Bear.
Oh,
and for those of you that don't know, Lizzie is actually my administrative assistant here at Kankakee Podcast / Lamore Media. So she helps with my crazy mind and kind of getting
a lot of work.
It really is a lot of work and putting up with me, as you can imagine. That could be a whole nother podcast episode for just our patrons to listen to and hear what I'm really like off mic.
I would love that. A lot of indecisiveness.
Yes.
A lot of back and forth.
Yes.
A lot of farting.
Yes. Yes to all the above. I am guilty as charged. This is our episode where we reflect on the top 10 most listened to episodes of Kankakee Podcast for this last year of 2022. And I got to say, there's some on this list I was not expecting. There's some surprises on here.
I agree.
And there's also some that didn't make the top 10 that I'm like, oh man, I feel like that one should have made it. Now, just to be clear, these are not episodes that Lizzie and I put in the top 10 saying, oh, these are our top 10 favorites. No, these are the episodes that were listened to the most by you, the listener, had the most downloads. So we'll start with number 10. And this did not happen last year, but number 10 is actually a tie. We're starting off with a tie. There were 2 episodes released this last year that had the same exact amount of downloads. And the first one being with the Kankakee County Museum, which they actually have 2 episodes on our top 10 countdown, which they should, because they're with us every month and they always have great topics. So I'm glad that there's 2 episodes included, but it's with Nellie Clark, or it's on Nellie Clark,
yes,
the Kankakee County Museum. It was with Jack Clacy of the Kankakee County Museum. Nellie Clark is just one of Kankakee's urban characters, urban legends, if you will. I mean, she was real, but there are so many stories that have come from the line of work that she did that at this point, some of the stories that you do hear, you gotta wonder if they're true or not.
Right.
Now, Jack, some of the stories he told us about Nellie, he had proof to back it up because he had, I think, police reports on some stories. So we know some of those stories were in fact true, but there are others that have heard about Nellie Clark that are just like, Do you remember about Nellie Clark?
I do.
Do you remember the story?
Somewhat.
Yeah.
Refresh my memory.
So Nell ran a brothel, or many brothels in Kankakee.
That.
The most famously well-known one is still in existence, not as a brothel, but as a bar.
Right.
At least I hope it's not a brothel. City Tavern in Kankakee, right along the railroad tracks. It's one of the most popular bars in Kankakee County, or taverns. And it's got a very colorful history, if you will. But yeah, Nellie Clark was known to run her and her ladies there. She was the madame.
Okay. I do remember that. I remember the baseline of her story.
I think one of my favorite parts from that episode, one of the stories that comes to mind, is the one I said about having hard evidence. And Jack was telling a story about how some of Nellie's girls tried to run away, and she got them back because she took good care of her ladies for the most part when it came to like clothing and things like that.
Right.
So they ran away. Okay. They still had all of her clothes that she bought them, all of their jewelry on and everything like that. So what did she do? Nellie called the police, said, "I've been robbed. These girls stole my clothes and my jewelry." That's how she got them back.
Wow.
It's a little messed up.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit.
But that's what I remember that's episode 40, if you've not listened to that one. I think that's going to be an episode that we revisit at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
Because
I feel like with every museum episode, it seems like there could be part 2 for every topic because there's always so much to expand on.
There really is.
It's almost like once you start talking about it, you remember more aspects to discuss. So that one in particular, I feel like you could definitely benefit from a part 2.
I agree. And so number 10, 10 most listened to episode. So number 40, Nellie Clark, is tied with number 47, Knack Brewing and Fermentations in Kankakee, which when they were on earlier this year, I think they literally just opened their doors, or they were about to.
I think they were about to.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
They were going to have their opening weekend.
Yes.
That escapes my mind. But regardless, 2022 was I'm almost positive, the first year for Knack Brewing in Kankakee. And it's historical because there hasn't been a beer brewing company in Kankakee for hundreds of years, or at least 100 years. So it's exciting for the city that they came, or that Knack Brewing opened up their brewery right in Kankakee, right along the river, actually, not too far from where the East River Walk is going to be constructed in downtown Kankakee. So Matt and Emily were on the episode. They talked all about how Matt first started brewing beer in, I think it was when they were living in Chicago at the time. They had I think they had a couple different apartments in Chicago, but that's how it all started. And then eventually because he had a full-time job. I think he worked for Verizon at one point. He was working for Verizon, and he just wasn't happy. And so he gave his wife this crazy idea. It's like, what would you think if I did this? And they worked it out, and now, as far as I know, they're doing pretty well.
Right, yes.
I am... I have not been there yet. We have not been there yet.
No.
I'm ashamed to say that. But
a goal for 2023.
It is a goal. I will say that I do not drink alcohol any longer, but they do have these craft sodas there that I want to try. So if you're
good.
like us and you don't drink, or maybe you're not of age, then they do have those there as well. So was really glad that they made the top 10 because they're the future of Kankakee and the present, but definitely the future since they just started. So that's number 10. The 10th most listened to episode this year is tied with those two. Getting to number 9, one of my favorites.
Me too.
Number 70, Alex Habib.
Such a nice guy. I actually just listened to this yesterday. I try to listen to all of them in order, but there are a few I miss here and there. So I went back, listened to the few that I missed, in preparation for this, and I just listened to his episode yesterday, and such a wholesome man. I loved his story, and he's so positive, which unfortunately is sometimes hard to come by. It's so easy to see the negative in things, but he does such a great job as being positive, and I feel like it's very contagious.
And he also has the ability to have a different perspective
Yes.
of anyone that's a natural-born citizen of the United States.
And that's what I really appreciate, too. I feel like that is such a treasured perspective that more people need to value or to, like, look through somebody else's eyes. Because, you know, yes, our country, our state, our town has a lot of problems like any other area in the world. And I feel like so many people don't think of how lucky we really are to have the things that we have. And I feel like Alex did a really great job of reminding us of that.
He definitely did, because when he first came here in the mid to late 70s, his country, Lebanon, was at war.
Yep. And not only that, but even when they weren't in war, not a lot of money, not a lot of resources, not a lot of opportunity. So again, I feel like he has a really unique perspective in realizing, you know what, maybe the states have problems, but much more opportunity than a lot of other people around the world have. And that's very important to remember.
Yeah, he had a lot of gratitude, and it was very infectious when we were sitting down and recording that episode. It just seeped into my skin.
Yep.
And I'm hoping that it sticks for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and something else to add, I was also the one that initially reached out to him to schedule an appearance. And he was so humble. It was very endearing. The first thing he said to me was, he said, "Thank you for reaching out to me." But he also was literally like, why? Like, why do you want to talk to me? Like, why me? Like, I'm just me. He was very, very humble. It was very endearing. But yeah, I'm grateful at first he did seem a little hesitant, maybe just because he was unsure of what exactly we wanted to talk about. But I'm so glad he decided to come on, because clearly people loved his episode if he's in the top 10.
Right, and I think he's just such a busy man.
That too, but he also was like, are you sure you want to talk to me?
Yeah.
Like, it was very, very endearing.
Which just made it all the more reason why we wanted to have him on the podcast.
Yes.
So if you haven't listened to it yet, Alex Habib is the owner of the Bourbonnais and Bradley Subway restaurants, and also the 2 Taco John's locations we have in the county. And I think one of my favorite, besides hearing his story of coming here to America, key things that I loved from that episode is that he ended up marrying the girl that essentially was his replacement at Taco John's originally. So I thought that was funny. And they've been married for however long now, because that was way back in the 80s.
Yep.
And then the second thing he invented the meat and potato burrito at Taco John's, which happens to be my favorite
Delicious.
item. So the breakfast one is my favorite, the meat and potato breakfast burrito. So it's so cool that Alex, all the soccer stuff too.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about Alex forever.
Right. Again, another episode you could have him on. Another person you could have on again for a second episode.
Yeah.
Just because he's such an interesting person. He has so much to offer.
Yeah. We could literally have him come back on to maybe talk about one certain thing about Taco John's, or even the whole high school Moments soccer team and how they recreated that about 4 years ago. So that's number 9, the 9th most listened to episode. Getting to number 8 was, once again, super happy this made the top 10 because it's well deserved, is my friend and coworker Bill Dyke. We had him on the podcast this year because he has officially hung up his baton as the band instructor at Bradley Bourbonnais Community High School. After 31 years, 32, I forget but regardless, for a long time, teaching anyway. I think at BBCHS it was 16 years or something like that. So he spent a good portion of his career at BBCHS. But I also work with Bill at the Milner Media radio stations. And he was one of the most nicest people to me when I first started working there as a newbie in broadcasting. He did not treat me like I was some fool that didn't know anything. He was very encouraging and very helpful when I needed help, when I would screw things up at the station. So that was my first introduction to him. And then I learned he was a band director full time and that he just did radio part time. But it just presented a great opportunity since he was retiring this year to have him on the podcast. And my favorite story is actually, I don't think, a story that we've talked about.
What's that?
It's mentioned on the podcast. It's episode 45 if you haven't listened to it yet. So there's one story when he was teaching, I think it was in Sheldon, Illinois. He was teaching high school kids band, and he was fresh out of college. He was like 21 or 22 years old, and he's teaching high school seniors, and if you remember, at least I was like this when I was in high school, but when I had young teachers that I knew that really weren't that much older than me, I had so many questions, and I just thought they were so cool. So I was always asked, "How old are you?" Blah, blah,
Do you live alone?
Do you live? Yeah.
Do you have your own house?
All that stuff.
Yeah.
And so when Bill Dyke graduated from college, he obviously, right around 21, 22 years old, he gets his first teaching job in Sheldon, and teaching high school band. And so one of the students one day raised her hand, and he goes, "Yes." Her name was Daphne, apparently. Said, "Yes, Daphne." Or no. Sorry, I'm messing this up. One student raised their hand and asked how old Bill Dyke was at the time. And at that time, he was 22. So he says 22 to that student. And then a minute later, another student raises her hand, and Bill points at her and says, "Yeah, Daphne." And she comments, "I date guys older than you." And so that story, it's still in the podcast, but the story that you might not know about it, and I feel like we can share this here, is that I had to edit out her name in the episode because somehow someone from that was in the room that day, or from her class back in 1989 or whatever it was, shared, once the podcast episode was shared, it made its way to Daphne, and she was like, "I didn't say that. I never said that." She completely denied it.
Yep. Which is, funny.
And she commented on the Facebook post about it too, complaining that I never said that. I would never say that. And so next thing I know, I'm getting a text from Bill Dyke, and he's like, "Yeah, could you just take her name out?"
Yeah.
So I ended up editing her name out of that story. But it's just, that's a little behind the scenes story for you. Sometimes those things happen, but I just thought it was hilarious. Like, she
funny.
was just, I guess, so upset about it.
I mean, I can kind of get it, but also so long ago. Does it really matter?
Yeah, what does it matter? It was 30 years ago.
Would anybody even remember that it was specifically that, Daphne?
I mean, it was a funny comment.
Right. She didn't really say anything inappropriate.
Well, it was inappropriate.
Well,
I mean, you know how
we're
it
all
is.
adults, though. It's not like she said anything really wild.
Yeah, but like, when you were in high school, and if you had a friend that was 17 or 18 years old and they're dating someone who's 21 or 22, it's always like,
yeah,
whoa.
True.
Like,
true. Sometimes I feel like kids just say that.
But she didn't say
cool.
that I think she was just joking.
Probably, or it could have, she might have just said, she might have been joking to, one, make fun of him as, being so young, but she also could have just said that to try to seem cool.
I think she was trying to poke
fun at his age.
Yeah. Because he was so close to their age.
Yeah.
Only like a 4-year difference.
Yeah. I remember being a student teacher and working with kids at the library and having it's funny. It's either like one or the other. Like either the kids will say comments like that to poke fun at you because you're not that much older than them, like the teenagers, but then sometimes they act like you're ancient. Like I remember one time at my old library having a conversation with a tween boy, maybe 11 or 12, about PlayStation. He came into the library looking for PlayStation games. We started talking about PlayStation. I mentioned I had a PlayStation when I was a kid. He's like, "Wow, you were alive? Like you were alive when the original PlayStation was made?" And I was like, it wasn't that long ago, but yeah, it's funny working with kids because it's either one or the other.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's too funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you remember from Bill's episode?
I mean, I feel like I remember that part the most because of the things that happened behind the scenes. I also remember, I think we were at maybe Oktoberfest. I don't know if maybe his episode was released around that time. But
I think it was released in the spring.
Okay, maybe not. We were somewhere. We were working a community event. We weren't there as visitors. We were there working for the podcast. And I remember so many people complimenting you on his episode specifically.
Oh.
Or complimenting you and sharing their excitement. So many, it seemed like a lot of them were either students or former students.
Or parents. Former
parents.
Students.
But I remember a lot of conversation happening about Bill.
Yeah.
Which, again, is not surprising because it was a great episode and he is in the top 10.
And he was a great band instructor.
Yes.
And just an all-around great guy outside of being a band instructor, too.
Mm-hmm.
Great radio personality as well. Great family man, all that stuff. So,
yes.
Bill, shout out to you, man, if you're listening. And hope to see you in the hall at the Valley sometime soon. So getting to number 7, definitely one of my favorite ones and one I geeked out over hardcore because I have ever since I learned about this guy and what he does. And that is, coming in at number 7 was number 56 with Doug Redenius, who is the man behind the Ian Fleming Foundation, which, if you're not familiar with Ian Fleming, he's the dude that wrote the James Bond novels that, in turn, were turned into the movies, and now we've got I don't know. Now I forget a 20.
You would know.
I forget. If Doug's listening to this, he's probably like, "Oh, come on, Jake, you should know that."
You should know that. You're a big James Bond fan. A lot of people don't know that they were based on books either.
No, but I mean, literally, most movies will say at the beginning of the movie if it is based on a book, and most movies are.
Nowadays.
They're based on a novel.
Yep.
But Doug, so the Ian Fleming Foundation, they're all about restoring and I guess not just restoring, but keeping them, what's the word, preserved.
Mm-hmm.
James Bond vehicles preserved.
That's super cool.
And this started in the 90s, like right around the year I was born, so right around 90. And before that, it actually all started when he just started collecting James Bond memorabilia in the 80s. And then from there, it escalated. It all started with a submarine from one of the James Bond films. And then from there, they've got so many different vehicles, and it's not just cars either. They've got planes, they've got boats as well. There's so many different vehicles in the James Bond films, and as you can imagine, since he's been doing this for so long, he's just loaded with stories.
Yep.
From the different James Bond films that he got to witness being made even.
That's
he was
awesome.
Even invited on the set, starting with some of the James Bond films in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
So
lots of fun facts.
I don't know if I could pick out one story.
No, so many to choose from.
I think one I could think of, it was kind of cool that one of their more recent restorations and preservations was a plane from the Goldfinger movie that was just completely wrecked. It had been sitting in some graveyard of airplanes in somewhere out west for years and years and years and years. And they found it. They didn't take the whole thing. They cut off like the front end of it. And they brought it back to Illinois and restored it.
Wow.
That's one of the many. I think it was cool to hear that he was an extra on 2 or 3 Bond films.
Yes.
At least one.
I think it was 3.
I thought it was 2 or 3 that he was an extra on. I don't know. There's so many stories with that episode. I don't even know where to begin.
Right.
But this is all for charity too. They don't restore, because what happens is there's a lot of museums that will, I guess, they rent out the James Bond equipment, and then the Ian Fleming Foundation, they take that money and they donate it to charity.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. So it's all for a good cause as well, and that's happening right here in Kankakee County. He lives in Moments. Most of these vehicles are actually stored here in the county.
I feel like a lot of people probably don't know that.
No, they don't.
Maybe they know about him, but they don't know.
Yeah, some do, some don't. It's kind of.
I mean, I didn't know, but I'm also not from here, so.
Right, but now you know.
Right, now I know. And I'm also not familiar with the James Bond movies. I've only watched one, and that was because we watched it together. I didn't grow up watching them, so I feel like that was really interesting for an outsider.
I think I made you watch Skyfall.
Right, because it almost like piques your curiosity now that I know all these facts, and behind the scenes about the movies makes you want to watch them, which I only can imagine how interesting it was for you, someone who's a big fan, to learn more about a franchise you love so much.
I would still love to go to the warehouse and see all the vehicles. Mm-hmm. I've seen some of them here and there over the years, but I haven't seen a lot of them that they have in their care. So that's number 7. Getting to number 6 is actually the one right before it. And that's number 55 with country singer Heather Wagner, who I actually had lunch with not that long ago the other day. When she's not singing, she works for Surf Pro of Kankakee County. So I had lunch with her to talk about Surf Pro stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, she had an interesting story as well. Growing up in St. Anne all of her life, always just being fascinated with, always being a music lover.
Yep.
Didn't necessarily learn how to play an instrument. And like most of us, life happens. You don't get to pursue some of those dreams that you want to pursue. Mm-hmm. And finally, just within like the last 4 years.
Right. Pretty recently.
2 to 4 years, Heather has been able to go after her dream of writing a song, or actually I should say completing a song, because she would write like snippets of songs or just lyrics or poems.
Yep.
She's finally able to complete some songs and release them and put out a couple singles in the last 2 to 3 years.
That's awesome.
And you know who is one of the biggest people to push her to do that was Nick Huffman.
I do remember her saying that. They became really good friends, and he was very encouraging and supportive, which not surprising because Nick was...
That's what Nick does.
Such a great man.
Or did, I should say. Mm-hmm. God rest his soul. But, you know, it was... Heather went through a rough divorce, and that's kind of what brought on this new era of... Which goes for almost anyone, that it doesn't even have to be a divorce. It could just be something ending in your life, some kind of transition. You know, maybe you are done with school.
Right. Any type of life change, whether
any type
it's
of
good
life
or bad.
Change. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Heather was going through this divorce, and Nick Huffman just like encouraged her, like, hey, you know, you want to do this. I think that's also around the same time she became a bartender at the Looney Bin, which was Nick Huffman's bar. Mm-hmm. And while she was bartending there, Nick would kind of give her advice on who she should be working with for like a producer.
So many people.
Right. Know so many musicians. So those are the kind of things that I remember from that episode with Heather. in particular.
Yeah, I really liked her episode. I feel like it's kind of just a reminder that it's never too late to chase your dreams.
Yeah.
And I feel like she kind of alluded to that as well by saying she kind of felt like she missed an opportunity. Life happens, and then, she finally did it. And I feel like that's something everybody needs to remember no matter what your dream is.
It's a good reminder.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that, Heather.
Yeah.
And getting to number 5 is one of our more recent ones that was just released in November of this year, and that's number 71 with the City of Kankakee Mayor Chris Curtis. And that was the first in a series that we started this year. There's only 2 episodes in the series so far, but there'll be plenty more coming in 2023. And that's just a series we're calling Meet the Mayor, where you get to hear from all the mayors or village presidents. Most of them are called mayors, but I think there are some of maybe the smaller municipalities in the county that will call themselves village presidents instead. And where you just get to learn about them. It's not necessarily politics do kind of drop in there a little bit, but as you've probably kind of guessed from this podcast, try not to get super deep into politics. And if we do, try not to kind of sway on one end or the other.
Right. It's more so just informational.
Yeah, it's more so just for you to chance to get to know the mayor, not necessarily what all of his plans are, but more or less just getting to know them as a person. So we learned some interesting things about Mayor Curtis, let me tell you.
Yeah, he's like a metalhead.
He's a metalhead. He loves just his 80s hair metal.
So funny, but I feel like so many people forget that politicians are real people.
Yeah,
kind of like
sorry. No,
it's kind of like when you're a little kid and you don't realize your teacher is a real person.
Yes.
You think your teacher sleeps at school, or you think your teacher doesn't have children or pets or hobbies. It's kind of like the same thing. Like, yeah, he does so much for our community, but he also is a regular person with, hobbies and favorite things and preferences. So I got a kick out of that because
I just immediately when I learned that about him, I just pictured him because he used to have long hair too, to go with his love for 80s hair metal.
I mean, you have to go all out with it, really.
Right. So I just imagine him with like this big long hair and just like head banging.
Yeah.
I don't know if like Slash.
I'm just thinking Slash
that's something
has big
you know
hair.
what? That's a question because I didn't ask him if it was like curly hair because Slash
has big curly hair. Or is it just big hair like Steven Tyler big hair?
I didn't. That's one. We should just call him up now and be hey, Mayor, straight, wavy, curly. What kind of
What curl type? What curl pattern? If they are curls, what curl pattern? Is it?
What was it that you had when you had long hair?
Yeah.
Now he's just got regular parted.
Very professional looking.
Very professional.
Well, he is, mayor.
Well, he is the mayor, but outside of that, we also learned, and maybe you didn't know about him, is that he has been in real estate for pretty much all of his career.
Mm-hmm.
But before even getting into real estate, he actually got his bachelor's degree in architecture.
I remember that too, which is not related at all. I mean, I guess if you're a real estate agent, it's probably helpful to understand.
From what I remember, it was helpful for him in the real estate field,
right? Like explaining how buildings are made.
Yeah,
to potential buyers, but
yes, and even like making additions and things on,
Yep.
But I think that maybe kind of alluded to maybe someone who sees a Nugent Curtis real estate sign, they don't have to wonder, I wonder if that Curtis is like the same Curtis as the one that's mayor. And yes, it is. Nugent Curtis is the real estate business that he owns with Joe Nugent in town. So it's just kind of cool to learn those things about him. And cross country. He coaches cross country as well.
I remember that. I'd also like to add that in the survey we sent out asking people their feedback on their favorite episodes, also asking for suggestions and things like that. His episode was one of the most commented on. A lot of people, I think we got something like 87 responses, 87 or 88.
I think we're up to 92
a few days
at
ago,
this
yeah.
point.
So probably more now, but I'd say probably half, if not more than half, said something positive about his episode, saying how they enjoyed the Meet the Mayor segment because they want to learn more about who is representing their community. And a lot of people also asked for similar things, like meeting other community members, again, in an informational way.
Yeah, they said something extending it past just mayors, other government officials.
Yes, and I agree with that. I mean, coming from a transplant, I find it very helpful because I don't know anything. I'm embarrassed to admit that, but I've also only been living here for, a year? So
it had almost a year.
Almost a year.
Almost a year. It'll be a year in what?
January,
which we're
practically there.
We're practically there.
So yeah, I feel like it is helpful to just, like you said, meet your community members.
Yeah,
so thanks for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. I just thought it would be fun.
Yeah, for sure.
We did the second one we released of the Meet the Mayor series this year was with Mayor Hodge of Hopkins Park.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like I said, more will come in 2023. Getting to number 4 now, the 4th most listened to episode of 2022 takes us to actually the very first episode we released this year. And that was with Matt Yeager in March, because we took the first 2 months of this year off. January and February, we did not release any new episodes, and we started up again in the middle of March, and we started right with Matt Yeager out of the gate.
Started out strong. I have to say, Matt Yeager is probably one of my favorite episodes. I love Southside Social Club. I've become obsessed. And I have a question, Matt Yeager, if you're listening to this, why is it called Southside Social Club if you're not from the Southside? Please answer my question. I feel like I did ask the same question in another behind the scenes episode we did.
Maybe
so
you did, yeah, but I that wasn't open to the public though. And this episode is.
So Matt Yeager, listen to this.
Yeah,
get back to me, email me, DM me, let me know the answer because I want to know.
I swear to God, when I was hosting the Wake and Jake morning show on WFAV, he was a guest on the show a couple times, and I could swear that one time he did illuminate to what the meaning was behind the name Southside Social Club, but I don't remember.
Right,
because that was a while. Right,
I would like to know.
I don't think it has anything to do with the South Side of Chicago. I'm almost positive it doesn't. I could be wrong, but I don't remember it being involved with the South Side of Chicago.
I'm going to have to ask him.
Yeah, I don't think it's in reference to that. I think it's maybe in reference to something else.
Regardless, a phenomenal band and a phenomenal person.
Well, my favorite thing about the Matt Yeager episode, obviously he's full of stories because since his very young teenage years and maybe even a little bit before that, he's been playing music, and he and I have a lot in common to where when we both started really getting into music, we were playing in punk bands and we were writing our own music and playing these garages and just wherever you could play, you would play these shows. And so it was cool to kind of connect with him on that sense, because there's always some crazy stories from those types of days, especially when you're doing like do-it-yourself touring and things like that, which the story he shared from his touring days in Deconstructing Jim was just great. You remember that one? I remember a story, but I don't remember if it was your story or his story, because you guys were kind of swapping and reminiscing. So the Deconstructing Jim was out on like just like a weekend tour, and they were in Iowa somewhere. I don't know if it was Cedar Rapids or it was somewhere in Iowa. And they had a fill-in bass player that weekend, and they were giving him a lot of liquid and encouragement. And I guess, Matt was also feeding him a lot of drinks and things like that. And, this fill-in bass player was single. And
I remember the story.
And so the bass player ended up picking up this mom and this daughter up at their show at this bar that they were playing at in Iowa. And they end up taking, because they're all in one vehicle, right? Because they're on tour. They're all in this van. So they end up agreeing to take the bass player to this daughter and mom's house after the show so he could
have some fun.
Have some fun. And there was some weird stuff.
Yeah.
And so what the funny part is, so while the bass player is in the house with these girls, the rest of the band is in the driveway of this house. And they're just chilling in the van.
Hanging out in the car.
Yeah. And then I guess there was a car parked to them in the driveway and it kept revving its engine. And there's just some weird stuff going on outside.
I would have just left.
It's a great story. It's much better actually hearing Matt tell it, of course. So you can make sure you listen to that. But also, I think what was a special treat about this one is that, most of the time when you see Matt Yeager or you see the South Side Social Club, there's a lot of times where you don't always get to hear their original material. A lot of times you're hearing songs they're covering from artists that we know and love. And what was cool about this episode is we actually got to hear Matt perform original songs by that he wrote himself. So I feel like that's something we don't get to hear as often as we used to.
No.
So that was a nice treat.
Little perk. Also, Matt Yeager, please play our wedding for us.
Yes, Matt, please. Maybe him and Lupe. They play shows together once in a while. Yeah. And maybe throw Todd Hazelrig in there.
Yep. Yep.
So that's number 4. Number 3 takes us to the second Kankakee County episode to make it into the top 10 this year. And I knew this one even before even releasing it. And this topic was on my list even before Kankakee Podcast was launched.
Yep.
I knew I wanted to talk about this subject, and that is Hotel Riverview, episode 52. That was with, once again, Jack Clacy of the Kankakee County Museum. I don't think Jory Walters was on that episode, if I remember correctly. I don't think she was there for that one. I could be wrong, though. But Hotel Riverview was this grandiose hotel that used to stand where present-day Cobb Park is in Kankakee, right along the river, right in the Riverview Historic District. And it was built by Emery Cobb, who Cobb Park is named after. Emery Cobb did so many things in Kankakee, starting in the late, in the late 1800s, going on into I'm trying to remember when he passed away. Actually, he might have passed away in the late 1800s or early 1900s, but regardless, he did a lot of development in Kankakee County when he retired here from Chicago. Emery Cobb did in the 1800s, but really when he retired, he literally just did a bunch of cool stuff for us to talk about.
I hope I'm like that when I'm retired.
But this hotel was just if you haven't looked at the pictures of it, you got to do so. And there's also, actually, to get some really good detail, the Kankakee County Museum actually has a model. They have a model of the hotel in the museum that you can check out. And it's pretty detailed, too, as well. But it was a place for the rich to come down from Chicago and enjoy an excursion.
Yep.
So
very interesting.
Unfortunately, it only lasted for 10 years and then it was burned down.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
I think that kind of adds to the facade of it, if that's the correct word. The reminiscing, it just makes the reminiscing all so much greater. So yeah, it burnt, and Cobb and his family just never rebuilt it because at that time, it was like the 1890s, if I have the year's correct, there was a recession going on in the country at the time. So it was like, I don't think we should rebuild. The hotel was actually having a hard time keeping occupancy. But regardless, it was a great episode to listen to. I was trying to think of more specific
I do remember
details.
Hotel Riverview was also one of the episodes that many people said they loved on the survey.
Yeah, they loved that one.
A lot of people said they love the museum episodes, but specifically they loved Hotel Riverview.
Yeah, it's just always been such a fascination of people in the area.
Right. And again, I feel like that's such a smart idea, a smart way to go about local history. Obviously, who better to partner with than our local museum?
Well, and Jack Clacy, I mean, he is one of the powerhouses when it comes to history and storytelling in the area.
Right, but again, just a really fun way to learn about our community.
Yes, absolutely agree. So we're almost to number one.
Almost.
Do you have, I mean, I know you can see what number one is, but
I'm not surprised. I feel like anybody that has been following you will not be surprised.
They will not be surprised, and they're probably already guessing it.
And it's very well deserved.
Yeah. Number two,
a great episode. One of my favorites.
This episode was just like lots of mind-blowing information.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like constantly just like, whoa, like that's crazy. And that was with number 49, Emily Lavoie. She was the second most listened to episode. And Emily Lavoie is a eating psychology coach, which means she helps you with your eating habits. Binge eating, stress eating.
Right. Understanding your hunger cues.
Yeah, understanding your hunger cues.
Understanding all food is good food.
Yes. And just really kind of taking the diet culture and just flipping it completely upside down.
Mm-hmm.
And Emily had so much mind-blowing information that she shared. And what was something that stuck with you? There were so many things.
I feel like I could talk about this episode forever.
I think you should be the one too.
Well, I feel like personally I connected to this episode a lot because this episode was released, I think, around the time I was ending the diet I was on. I was on a very strict diet for about a year. I did lose 100 pounds. It was not the best diet to be on. And I did struggle a lot with going from being on a really strict diet to then eating like a normal person. I was basically thrown to the wolves. Like, okay, now you reached your goal weight, but now what? And I knew what I needed to do. I knew I was supposed to eat more fruits and veggies, eat less carbs, et cetera, et cetera. But just knowing what to do doesn't always click in your brain. And I feel like Emily really helped me with that. Not that I'm trying to make this all about me, but I feel like there's so many people who can probably relate to that, to not knowing how to eat like a normal person. And yeah, she just had so many good things to say about kind of making you feel like you're not alone, like it's okay that you want to eat ice cream for dinner because all food is good food, but like remember then like you should also then try to eat like healthier things to balance it out, and kind of like making sure you're aware, like, yes, you can eat quote unquote bad foods, and Emily will like that I'm not saying that because all foods are good foods, but you know what I'm saying? Like, yes, you can eat ice cream, yes, you can eat popcorn, yes, you can eat cookies, but like you also need to learn to like understand what your body's craving. Like your body still needs nutrients and vitamins and minerals and all those good things. So yeah, I feel like it definitely was very, very helpful for many reasons, for understanding eating psychology, understanding why diet culture sets people up to fail, and then kind of like you said, this like mind-blowing, like, what? Like there's different types of hunger? Like I'm not just a ravenous monster all of the time?
One of my favorite eye-opening things was the psychology behind labeling food bad.
Yes.
The reason why she doesn't like to use terms like bad food is because what happens when you tell someone they see something shiny and they're like, ooh, I want to touch that. And they're like, no, don't touch it. Don't touch. And you're just like, oh, I just want to touch it even more now.
Yeah.
So like when, someone says, oh, that ice cream, it's horrible for you. That bread, that's so bad for you. It just kind of makes you want it more.
Yeah.
And that's what was mind-opening to me is when she said that, I'm like, my gosh, that makes so much sense.
It makes sense, yeah. And I remember her also saying to the same effect, that's why as parents, you shouldn't use food as incentive or as punishment. And I grew up in a house like that.
I'm guilty of doing that with Owen.
Well, I grew up in a house not really as an incentive. I feel like using it as punishment is worse personally. But I grew up in a house like that where if I misbehaved, I wouldn't get dessert.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And I'm not blaming my parents. I understand why they would do that.
Well,
but it kind of...
times.
Right. But it kind of also then creates this sense that, okay, well, then dessert is a treat. And yes, in some sense it is, but you don't want to use food as a reward. You don't want to ingrain that in your children because then it kind of sets up this notion that anytime they do something good, well, then I can go out and eat a bunch of junk food. And again, I'm not saying junk food is bad because it's not, but it's something that should be eaten in moderation, not only as a treat, because then you're not really learning that it's something that you can have in moderation. And when you don't eat something in moderation, that's when it becomes a problem. Because then you eat it whenever you can because you're worried that you'll never be able to get it again.
Yes.
And it's the same thing using food as a reward. If you're really good, which I literally did this yesterday where Owen asked me in the morning, can we go to McDonald's for lunch? And he asked that because he watched a video where somebody was eating McDonald's. So I said, if you're a good boy today, when we go to the grocery store, because he's sometimes hard in the grocery store.
Yes.
Then I'll take you to so I'm guilty. I'm guilty of doing
I've done it with
I'm
them
sure
too.
everybody is. But she was saying how that's also something you don't always want to do because you don't want to treat food as like a reward or as punishment.
Yeah, right.
But
there's like I said, there's so many things that were, and I think another thing that was really great from her episode was when she was talking about how not everybody is the same. We all have different bodies, and we should not all be expected to be the same weight.
Yes.
And be the
same size.
Right, the same size. We all have different biology makeup,
Right.
So that's also something that she tapped into as well. So it's just, if you haven't listened to number 49 yet, it'll just change.
Right.
Change your life. It changed mine. I literally think about something that she said in that episode every single day.
Yes. Something else she said that resonated with me that I just remembered after you made that comment about body sizes was she said that so many people, I feel like especially women, when they get older, they always will think, oh, I want to lose weight because I want to be the size I was in high school. A lot of people use that as their end goal weight. And I'm guilty of that. But Emily had made a good comment and said, for example, I'm 31. I've changed so much since I was 15. That was 17 years ago. I'm an entirely different person in so many ways, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So why would I expect my body to somehow transform backwards?
Your body has different needs at age 31.
Yes. Right. And it really has nothing to do with weight either. You're not growing necessarily in height, but your body is still growing in some ways. So I feel like that was very eye-opening. And
just kind of getting across the thing, just because you weigh more than someone else does not mean you are unhealthy.
Right.
That, that kind of thing.
Right.
So just, having a better relationship with food is.
Yeah. And I feel like if you're a person who thinks that you have a good relationship with food, I feel like there's still takeaways from her episode.
Absolutely.
Takeaways for everybody.
Yeah. And Emily is born and raised in Kankakee County. So.
Yes.
At least I think so.
I'm not
sure. If I remember correctly. I don't know. There's so. But Emily, we love you.
We do.
Thank you for being on the podcast. And she's number 2. So. Number 1.
We need a drum roll.
We do need a drum roll. I should have brought my little drum roll sound effect.
Oh,
thing.
Yeah.
So this episode is making history again, at least in the history of Kankakee Podcast. So this, so far, is the only episode that has made it in the top 10 2 years in a row. And last year, it was number 2. This year, it's number 1.
Yep.
Now, it wasn't obviously released this year. This episode was released in 2021, but we did mention his name earlier. And unfortunately, this year in 2022, he passed away. And so when he passed away, there was a lot of people, you know, of course, we made a post about it because he's part of our podcast history.
Right.
We post our condolences to him, his family, and his friends. And some people, I think a lot of people re-listened to the episode, and a lot of people just discovered it for the first time, or maybe they saw it when it was posted a year ago, but they never checked it out. So I think, and just with him being the way he was, and that, of course, is Nick Huffman, is who we're talking about. Nick Huffman, episode 13 is number 1 in the top, or number 1 in the top 10 most listened to episodes of Kankakee Podcast this year. He was 1 in a million here in, I obviously in the whole world, but in the county, there's just not many people that you can name off that can get along with almost every single type of person. Everyone was connected with Nick. It didn't matter if you were a Democrat or a Republican or a, black, white, Hispanic, you were more religious or not religious, or just every single walk of life. Nick had a way of connecting with everyone, and everyone knew him. Some people just knew him because he did some really absurd things, but he also had the biggest heart.
He did.
He was like, I think I read a post, and I wish I could remember. I can't remember word for word. I think it was something his mother, Maureen, posted on Facebook, because I did add her on Facebook, I think, after Nick passed. And she said something along the lines of, if it wasn't her, it was someone else. So I apologize if it wasn't Maureen, but she said, whoever it was, said something along the lines of, he was such, he was like, had the immaturity of a child, but also had the biggest heart of a child. A lot of times I feel like a lot of times children have bigger hearts than adults can, right?
They do. They're not jaded or...
And that's the way Nick was.
Yep. That's true. Yeah, I unfortunately never got to meet him in person, but we did have several exchanges on social media. And he was always so sweet, and this brings a smile to my face, but he always would refer to me as your wife, it was very sweet. It was a very sweet thing. And like at one point, neither of us ever corrected him because that doesn't really matter. The labels don't really matter, but it was just very endearing because he would always talk about, oh, you guys love each other so much, and it comes across so obviously. And he was always so sweet, and he always liked to point out the positive things in people. Like something as simple as, oh wow, I can tell you guys really love each other. That's a very sweet thing to say, to me, to someone he doesn't even know. It was very, very sweet.
I think he had that ability to sense when something was for real or
genuine,
not for real, or when someone was genuine or not.
Right. Well, that's because he was such a genuine person. And I don't think I ever told you this, but one time he had posted something in the podcast Facebook group, and in conversation he had mentioned that he was just at the Walmart in Tinley Park. I think it was around Christmas time, and he was looking for something. And he said he found it at the Walmart in Tinley Park. And I was just at that Walmart, and I was like genuinely sad that I didn't run into him. Because like I said, although I never met him, I definitely would have been like, hey, I kind of know you. And I was sad that I missed an opportunity to meet him.
That is
just by chance, which is kind of funny that if that did happen, we would have met not even anywhere near here.
Yeah. Do you think you would have known it was him?
Oh, I absolutely would have known it was him.
That was a dumb question. You can't mistake Nick Huffman.
Yes.
He was a big supporter of Kankakee Podcast. And, when we started, obviously he was episode 13, so not really too far in the grand scheme of things. And we're still so new.
Yeah, and I feel like that still is trending too. Didn't you recently say something about how like the numbers continue on his episode, continue to grow?
Well, so not only is he's also, so he's the most listened to episode this year, but he's actually the most listened to episode of Kankakee Podcast ever. Mm-hmm. So he's also number one in that rank as well. There's no other episode that has been downloaded the most than Nick Huffman's.
Yep.
And all for good reason. I really wish we would have been able to do a second round, but I'm grateful that we got to do one because we talked for 2.5 hours, something along those lines. And I still always think back to something he said to me when we were setting up that recording session. He kept kind of, because Nick Huffman, he was on the list of people I wanted to have on the podcast. And he was kind of poking me about it a little more than normal. And I eventually found out the reason why was because he told me of his medical issues, and he said, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around. So it was like, if you want to do something, let's do it soon.
That's so sad.
And, people say things like that, and sometimes just like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. But then literally like almost a year later after he was on the podcast, he passed away.
Right.
And
sad.
Like that just kind of sent chills up and down my spine. Because it's like, wow, he wasn't kidding. Like he really, and I just keep thinking about, man, I'm so glad that we captured that conversation, and not just so much that to have it a part of the podcast, but I don't know I think I told you this, not too long after he passed away, maybe a month or two after Nick passed away this year, I got a Facebook message from his daughter, and his daughter had listened to the episode, and she was just saying thank you for having recorded that conversation.
Yeah,
she was very
grateful.
She was very grateful for it.
Bet.
It was so sweet. And so that just made it. Not that I ever, of course, I wanted to sit down with Nick Huffman and have him a part of the Kankakee Podcast repertoire, but that just, I don't know.
It was the icing on the cake.
It was.
To know that you were able to offer her something she can have forever.
Yes.
To connect to her dad with.
Because I feel like there's a lot of other things that can kind of dwindle away after a while, but that's something she can always have.
Right.
She can always have that. She can always go back, and it's not just for her, like
anyone.
For the generations of the Huffman family to come, they can truly learn what their ancestor was really like straight from his mouth, not stories that have been passed down and probably modified, but like straight out of the gutter. This was Nick Huffman, your great, great, great grandfather.
Oh, that's so sweet.
So yeah, those are the things. There's so many things from that episode, but those are two things I think of for sure is when he was telling me that, hey, I don't have that much time left. Let's make sure we record this episode. And then his daughter reaching out after his death. Actually, there's one more thing I think of. In his book that he wrote, he had me read, at the very end of the episode, he had me read like the last page or two of his book. And I know he wanted me to read that too, because he knew he was going to be passing away.
Oh.
And just because the way the book kind of ends too, it was just, that's another thing that just kind of permeates in my mind forever, is just thinking about how he wanted me to read that.
Yeah.
So
very sad.
Yeah. But so just grateful to everything Nick Huffman did and just how passionate he was, whether it was, off the rails or just pure mushy heart of gold stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He was made of all of it.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you can think of when you think of the Nick Huffman episode, or just things that maybe you heard about Nick?
Well, you definitely summed the episode up well. And again, on the survey, more than 75% of people said that Nick's episode was also one of their favorites, which again is not surprising and very well deserved.
I think it would be fun, and I've thought about this since his passing, to do an episode interviewing a wide variety of, how I mentioned how he connected with almost every walk of life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it'd be kind of cool to do an episode where you interview a couple people, or maybe more than a couple, of just people from different walks of life. Because even we're talking like the homeless person on the street that struggles with alcoholism, all the way up to like State's Attorney Jim Rowe. Like State's Attorney Jim Rowe had respect for Nick Huffman.
Right.
Like that's crazy.
Yeah, I love that idea. Like almost like interviewing a person from every area of Nick's life.
Right. Every one of those walks of life.
Right. All phases of his life.
Yeah.
I love that idea. I think that would be a great way to remember him.
Yeah, I think so too. Right. It would be kind of just a memento. A memento? Memento? Is that?
Yeah. Like a.
Yeah.
Almost like a way to memorialize him.
Yes, exactly. Even though he's kind of already memorialized.
Well, yes, he was so well loved, but I feel like that would be something really special.
Yeah, I think so too. So that's it. That's the 10 most downloaded, listened to episodes of Kankakee Podcast this year, and there's so many great episodes this year that didn't even make it in the top 10. Not to say that those weren't great episodes. Are there some that you can think of that were your favorites that aren't in the top 10?
Yes, I feel like my favorite episode that is not in the top 10 was probably DeMarco.
Oh, DeMarco, yes.
Yes.
And I think what really connected you with that, like a lot of our guests, is I think him talking about the library when he was in prison.
Yes.
He read a lot of books from the library in the prison.
Yes. And just an interesting story. He's very passionate. I cried listening to his episode because you can just feel his emotion coming through.
There were times where he was getting teary-eyed.
Yeah, I could sense that. And just a all-around interesting story. And I feel like just kind of gives you like a new sense of appreciation to be like, wow, like people have sometimes such a rough go around, and like look at how successful he is. Like he really did fight through his battles. It just gives you a new sense of admiration for people, and just I really appreciate his episode.
Yeah, I agree. So shout out to DeMarco, Hampton, and Copious Lifestyle. And from the bottom of our hearts, we just want to thank you for listening, supporting, and being a part of the podcast, because I really feel like this isn't my podcast. This isn't our Lizzie and I's podcast. This is our podcast, as in everyone that's involved, whether you're just you just listen to the episodes every time they come out, or you tell a friend or a family member about them, or you're part of the patron program. In whatever circumstance you're involved in the show, I feel like it's a community effort, and it's not just me. And I want to keep going more in that direction if we can. Thank you for that. And of course, thank you to our sponsors too, because if it wasn't for our sponsors, this wouldn't be possible either. So, Noble Dairy Queen, Adam Elroy of Edward Jones, Brenda Whittler of 31 Gifts, Allison Ascher of Coldwell Banker Realty, Kankakee Community College, Milner Media Partners, Main Street Pharmacy, D. Westphal Jewelers, True Heights Treatment, King Music, Chicago Dough Company, of course, our partnership with Kankakee County Museum. Another partnership we're going to be starting up this year is with the Kankakee Valley Theater Association. We'll probably be doing something similar. I might strike up a partnership with Acting Out Theater Company too, just because I like supporting local theater. And then something brand new that we're just announcing now, actually, for 2023, we are proudly going to be presented by some title sponsors, Pewter Pros, Digital World Design, and Stitch Prints, all in Bradley, owned by the Ringy family. They've had Pewter Pros was his first business over 25 years. So I want to give a huge shout out to Steve Ringy Jr. and his whole family for coming on and being our title sponsors for 2023. It's the most flattering thing that Steve wants to put his local businesses behind Kankakee Podcast and support us. So please support all of these businesses as they do support us as well. And if there's anyone I'm forgetting, please forgive me. And then to our patrons as well. If you want to be a part of the podcast and pledge a certain amount a month to help the show monetarily, you can do so for as little as $1 a month. So it doesn't cost that much. So, we want to give a shout out to some of our patrons, at least. I know not everyone's on this list because I know there's some people that literally just signed up. But Karen Bishop, Jake Lee, Jesse Arseneau, Dave Barron, Darrell Damper, Samantha Rocknowski, Lake Iverson, Travis Garcia, Jane Bostwick, Dawn Harrison, Simon Topliss, Scott Wright, Kerry O'Connell, Jamie Race, JoAnn Barrie, Anthony Vieceli, Erik Olson, Nolan Bukowski, Natalie Flageole, Carl Earps, Jeff and Rosa Carroll, Teague Dreenan, Sandy and Steve Twait, and Rose Lucky. And like I said, I know there's some more that we're missing from the list, but truly grateful for you all because if it wasn't for your support, our monthly goal is $400 a month for our patron program. And we're the last time I checked as of recording this podcast, I think we need to go like another $112 to get to that $400 monthly goal. And that's just to kind of help cover the expenses for the podcast that we have every month and just any kind of expense that comes up. Yeah, am I forgetting anyone? Besides, well, of course I'm forgetting someone, my family. Oh. I cannot forget my family. If it was not for my dear Lizzie here and putting up with all my craziness and all the things she does behind the scenes for Kankakee Podcast, this would not happen. And my whole entire family as well has been extremely supportive. Yeah. My dearest friend, Dr. Don, has been a big help off the mic as well. I toss ideas out to him all the time to just kind of see what he thinks of things. So shout out to Dr. Don, as I like to call him. I'm hoping I didn't forget anyone, but if I did, again, I apologize. Thank you so much for listening and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
This river carries on.